Hi, my name is Brett Hare, and I'd like to welcome you to our third episode of Summit Philanthropies. Summit Philanthropies is a show designed to basically accomplish four objectives. One, to draw attention to the numerous and very worthy Summit charities. Two, to engage the audience in helping them understand what these charities do and why they do it. Highlight some of the good works by interviewing the leadership of these various charities. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, to remind everybody that Winston Churchill was right when he said that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Today, I am very fortunate to have a friend and a partner with me from the Community Foundation of New Jersey. Hans Dekker, who is their president, is here to help all of us understand what this valuable state asset provides in the way of its numerous philanthropic benevolences and how it works, how you might find it helpful in your giving. On a personal note, the Other Fellow First Foundation, which is the sponsor of this program, maintains its entire accounting and back office operations at the Community Foundation of New Jersey. We could not exist without their support. They're vital to what we do. And on a personal note, my family has a number of accounts with the Community Foundation of New Jersey for precisely the same reasons. And we'll get into that as we explore what the foundation does with Hans, but we're very, very fortunate to have him today. And Hans, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So why don't we start, Hans, by you telling us what the community foundations are, what they do, and a little about your organization.
Sure. So community foundations were founded a little over 100 years ago in 1914, and there was a bank in Cleveland that held a lot of charitable trusts, and one of their leading trusts, one of their largest trusts, was to retrofit covered wagons going west, and they didn't have any covered wagons and they couldn't spend the money, and at that time it was a fairly expensive and time-consuming process to go back to court to change the charitable purpose of the account. And the civic leadership of Cleveland said, what if we had a vehicle where people could leave money to their community with their intent, with their goals attached to it, but allow the current leadership, the future leadership of the community, to evolve it to meet current needs. The kind of the famous example in the charitable world is March of Dimes started to cure polio and then has moved on to work more broadly on birth defects. So the idea was to create a vehicle where people could leave money to their community with their own goals, as I said, attached, but then future leadership would say, we want to make sure this gets spent in the wisest, most critical manner for our community.
I see. So why don't you start with the basics of where you're located, how big you are, maybe how many, and also what is a donor-advised fund, which is the sort of backbone of what the foundation does.
So just doing a little more of the history. For the first 50 or 60 years of community foundations, we were a planned giving vehicle, where the United Way is the current checking account for a community. We were a place that people put in their estate money for their community. And most community foundations grew up, that was their sole mission. About 30 years ago, charitable families said, in addition to leaving something in my estate, I want to be charitable right now, and I need a partner to do that. And so that's what now we call in the business the donor advised fund. So families, in lieu of creating their own foundation, or as a way to sort of goose up their charitable giving, we'll make a gift to a community foundation. It's a charitable gift as if you made a gift to any charity. You get your deduction for the year you make the gift, but you retain the right to provide advice about subsequent grants out of your fund to charities that you care about. And a lot of people pause on the advice word, and the way we answer that is as long as the advice is for a charitable purpose, out it goes. So we make somewhere between 6,000 or 7,000 grants a year on behalf of the families and companies that have donor advised funds with us. Last year they totaled about $60 million in grants.
Wow.
2/3 to new charities in New Jersey, and another third go where families have other charitable interests, their alma mater, a place that their family might be from, and things like that.
So how big is the community foundation in New Jersey?
So we have a total of about $460 million in assets, but it's a kind of a high velocity operation. So about $100 million came in last year in new gifts into current and new funds, and about, as I said, about $60 million goes out. And then depending on how the market performs, we have some growth from the market as well.
So if a donor from Summit was interested in establishing an account with you, you would receive the funds, the donor would receive a tax deduction that year for that donation. The donor would then be given a menu of investment choices that you would provide the donor so that the donor could decide how much risk he or she wanted to take in having that money grow. And then if the donor decided that they'd like to make 4 or 5 gifts toward the end of the year, they would either go online and say, please make the following 4 or 5 contributions. As I understand it, you would then honor those contributions. You would send notification to the recipient that this gift is coming to you from your friend and donor, Brett Hare, and they would basically take care of everything that you would otherwise have to do, including writing the check, and all of that is part of the donor-advised experience.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So effectively then, you're making it a very efficient process. Tax-wise, investment-wise, and for somebody to try to do this themselves would be rather expensive, right?
Yeah, I think there's sort of 3 ways to do it. You can make direct charitable gifts on your own. People have been doing it for hundreds of years. Works fine. You can create a private foundation that has the pomp and circumstance of the private foundation, but also the administration, board meetings, tax returns, audits, excise taxes, and the like. And people use donor-advised funds as sort of having the best of both worlds. They get to drive where the giving goes. They get to have options on the investment, but they can time and structure their charitable gift to be the smartest from a tax perspective. So roughly half of our gifts each year will be appreciated securities, where folks can avoid the capital gains and get the fair market value for their tax deduction. And typically, not always, when they're giving directly, they're writing a check out of their checking account, which may not have been the smartest asset, if you will, to use from a tax perspective.
I see. So if I want to give $10,000 to my alma mater, and I have shares of Google that have appreciated, by donating those shares to you, that allows me to avoid paying the tax on that $10,000 worth of Google. You then presumably sell the Google and make the distribution. So I win, my alma mater wins, and Uncle Sam is not invited to the dinner table.
Correct.
I see. That's very, very efficient. And I'm sure there are a lot of folks listening today, Hans, who in the state of New Jersey, where taxes are a significant part of the political debate, and finding ways to combat the loss of state and local tax deductions. Could you tell us a little something about what your organization is doing to perhaps help New Jersey residents enjoy some relief with regard to their philanthropic appetites?
So we have seen a lot of charitable families leave the state. They'll establish residence in Florida or Arizona or even Pennsylvania, largely because they're at a stage of life where they don't have to pay the New Jersey income tax anymore. And New Jersey has always had essentially a gross income tax. And we are now, along with a coalition of nonprofits, making the case that we ought to reward charitable New Jersey families with a deduction on their state income tax if they make a charitable gift. One of the reasons this is especially timely is the federal tax law from the tax reform from a year ago has raised this, by raising the standard deduction, has nonprofits worried that folks are going to reduce their charitable giving because up into about $24,000, there's no incentive for them to give because that's what the standard deduction is. So there's a real concern that there's going to be a decline in charitable giving in general. So from where we sit, we ought to incent folks as much as we can to continue to be charitable and allowing them to get a state income tax as well as maximize their federal tax deduction, we think is a good thing for everybody.
Is there reason to be encouraged by recent developments?
So yes, the New Jersey Senate passed the bill unanimously, and we're waiting for the Assembly to take it up. And so we've taken some heart from the unanimity of our senators in support of this. And so we're optimistic. You know, I think like everything in the New Jersey state budget, it's the very, very tight budget, and there is a projected loss of revenue, at least in the short run, from giving this deduction. We might argue that it'll incent folks to stay in New Jersey, and so maybe it won't have a negative impact on revenue in the long run, but that is something they're concerned about.
Okay. Are there examples, Hans, other than the Other Fellow First Foundation, that you could share with our audience today that would illustrate some of the organizations that you work with that might inspire others to follow?
Sure. So I think that's one of the nice things about, sort of as you said earlier, stripping out the administrative part of your charitable giving, because it allows you to focus on the impact side. And so we have over 1,000 families that have accounts, and so it's a very ecumenical approach to charitable giving. But we have families, for instance, that have had children that were really impacted by learning disabilities and have devoted a significant amount of their philanthropic resources to building resources for families where kids have learning disabilities, and they've done some remarkable work there. In fact, there's a national program called understood.org that's this very, very rich resource for families who have learning disabilities. We have families who lost children in 9/11 who've devoted their work. One of the children had experienced really bad school-based anxiety when they were young, and they have devoted their philanthropy in his memory to helping kids with school-based anxiety. We have folks that are really worried about women who've experienced domestic violence and have pets at home. And not all shelters will take women who have pets. And so she's trying to build the capacity of the domestic violence shelter to allow families that have pets to come. And that's a really remarkable piece of work as well.
So tell us a little something. I think we now have a pretty good understanding of what a donor-advised fund is. Yeah. But I believe you also have an element of your foundation, which I would characterize as non-restricted, where people who understand and appreciate the true diversified world of opportunities that you see in the way of New Jersey needs. Could you tell us a little something about how, if somebody just gave you an unrestricted gift, how you might deal with that.
So we get two kinds of gifts. This goes back to the roots of the community foundations, where folks will leave money, and sometimes they'll say, I just wanted to do good work in my community. And I can't predict what the issue is going to be 20 years from now.
So they'll say, you figure it out.
You figure it out. And by you, they mean what we try to do is have a board and committee structures that represent folks in our community who have their fingers on the pulse, who can make those decisions now, 5, 10, 20 years from now. We'll also have folks who leave us money, but with a category around it. And our job, as I said earlier, is to marry that category to current needs. And then this last category we've been talking about, the donor advised fund folks. And the way I like to phrase it is the platonic form is that there are certain issues where all of those facets of the foundation are working together. One of the ones we're currently working on is the way New Jersey handles youth prisoners. So New Jersey right now spends $300,000 a year to lock up 14 and 15-year-olds, some of whom get put into solitary confinement for long periods of time. From where we sit and from where the advocates sit that are working on the issue, the $300,000 seems like a lot, especially when you realize that the outcomes aren't very good. It's not that it's this enriched basket of services. In fact, many of those kids are going on to adult prison. And there's a movement nationally to get out of a more industrial type of imprisonment into more of a secure group home movement. And in fact, Governor Christie, right before he left, agreed to close 3 of the 4 juvenile prisons. So we have put philanthropic resources from our own unrestricted work, where donors who had certain restrictions placed on their money, but that work was a fit, and then we've asked some of our fund holders to participate as well, where that's a priority for them, to put money into this work to figure out what are we going to do in New Jersey to have a better system around youth imprisonment.
So it's fair to say then, Hans, that there are really 2 ways for you, for a donor to work with your foundation. One, they can give you unrestricted dollars, or 2, they could set up a donor advised fund. And then if you knew what this family was interested in, and they were interested in expanding their horizons, you could help them by sharing with them ideas and opportunities that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise see.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And one of the ways I think about families who do charitable giving is you should think about it almost like an asset allocation, like you would your investment portfolio. So you're going to have what I call the fixed income, your alma mater, maybe your church, your religious institution, maybe the emergency squad income. And those are institutions where they're part of the fabric of your community. You want to support them, but you may not be pushing hard to ask a lot of questions, right? It's just an allocation that you feel good about. Then our question is, where can we help you on the venture capital or the seed capital? The issues where you really want to move the needle. Mm-hmm. And so can we be helpful when you bring us an idea, and then occasionally we are able to bring you an idea that you're responding to.
Excellent. Well, an opportunity like this would be incomplete if there wasn't some focus and attention on how, if somebody watching the show was interested in opening an account, how do they do that, Hans?
Sure. Like everybody now, we have a lot of online mechanisms, but basically it's a conversation with the family and us about what are their priorities for their charitable giving. We stay out of the tax planning, but we know enough to say you should be talking to your advisors about how to think about this from a tax planning perspective. And then a lot of families are wrestling with how to involve their family. So how do I want my kids and maybe even my grandkids involved? And so we try to structure an agreement that reflects their current needs, sort of the being smart on the tax planning side, and then what the charitable work they want to do is, and how do they want to involve their family. And that sounds more complicated than it is sometimes, but that's usually the conversation. And then we craft a relatively simple agreement, which is really a contract between the family and us that says, we're going to give you this money, but here are the rules we family want to have around how it gets used. So that one of the things that deters charitable giving is a sense that the money is not going to be used for purposes that you intended. And we want to assure folks that through this contract that the money's going to go to things that they care about.
So if you wanted to open, say, a $50,000 or a $10,000 account, is that something you do by calling your organization, or do you do it online? Or
Usually, I mean, there's some online competitors out there. We want to have a little more of an enriched relationship with folks, and so
Cool.
typically they call and we'll have a cup of coffee and talk through the issues. And
you're located in Morristown, right?
we're in Morristown. We're in an old Tudor mansion in the back of a county park.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I hope the audience has had an opportunity to enjoy listening to a pro talk about what, in my opinion, is a very fascinating world of efficient giving. And the more giving becomes easy to think about and easy to accomplish, in the end, the easier and more fun it is to participate in the philanthropic world. So on behalf of the Other Fellow First Foundation, Hans, and our hometown TV hosts, we'd like to thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us today, and hope that the audience will take the time to either send Hans an email or give him a call, and very much appreciate you coming, Hans.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
I appreciate it.
You bet.
Nice to see you.